Um, Hi everybody. My name is Betty Owoo, and I am a recent graduate from the London School of Architecture, and a young trustee at the Architecture Foundation. And I'm going to be reading tonight's bedtime story, which is Sitopia: How Food Can Save the World by Carolyn. I suppose that's backwards on the screen, but hopefully anyway. So I just wanted to start by just giving a massive thank you to Alicia Pivaro and to Rosie Gibb Stevenson for extending the invitation to me to be here tonight, but also for organising such a brilliant series of readers for this series, and also for the 100 Studio in general, and for making such a great initiative. And so before I started reading, I just wanted to give a little bit of background as to why I've chosen to read Sitopia this evening, and the influence that Carolyn Steele's writing has had on me in my life this year. So for the past year, as part of my thesis project at the LSA, I've been looking into foodscapes and urban green spaces, and the how we can harness these to work for us and to improve our health and well-being, because for the most part that doesn't always work in our favour, and we're kind of living in these distorted foodscapes that are really doing us harm. And as I was working on my thesis project, I kept hearing her name come up again and again, like, you've got to read Carolyn Steele, you've got to read it. She's fantastic, she will really help you. And I remember Jameson, who's the critical practice leader at LSA, was really adamant that I read it. So I read Hungry City in about a week. I just thought it was the most brilliant thing, and it just really spoke to what I was interested in. And Carolyn Steele's she talks about, in her first book, Hungry City, how food has shaped the cities and the environments that we live in for millennia, ever since we became agrarian society members. And she kind of finishes this book with this really sort of cryptic chapter called Sitopia, and that becomes her latest novel, which came out this year. And what is Sitopia? So it's a portmanteau of two Greek words. It's a portmanteau of sitos, which means food, and topos, which means place. And she explains it really eloquently at the end of Sitopia, so I'll just read this passage first to start us off. Food's unique potential to heal us stems from the profound relationship that it represents between us and our world. The fact that we are blind to its power is due to our having forgotten what it really is. By learning to see food and to see the world through it, we can find our true place in the natural order again. By valuing what we eat and knowing what it is, we can reconnect ourselves to each other and to our world. This is the true meaning of Sitopia, using food to understand what it means to be human and how to coexist with our fellow humans and non-humans through time. By eating together consciously, we can be both grounded and transported, connected to a greater order of things. We can exist for a period, both inside and outside time, and we can feel profoundly at home. I just really think it's such an important way of seeing the world through the lens of food. And so tonight I'm going to be reading from Sitopia, from chapter 6, which is entitled Nature. So I hope you enjoy. The Otter Estuary, Devon. I am staring at some greenish yellow seed pods in a hedgerow behind one of the most beautiful beaches in Britain. It's a glorious midsummer day, and just beyond my gaze is the sort of scene to make a clammy office worker weep. A sparkling sea, rust-red cliffs, and a tall stand of green pines against a cloudless cornflower blue sky. Yet it is these seed pods, which belong, I've just learned, to the Alexander plant, on which my whole attention is now focused. My guide is Robin Harford, a renowned forager who sometimes styles himself as an ethnobotanist if he can face the barrage of questions that inevitably follows. Today he is sharing with me some of the secrets of his favourite foraging spot, the Otter Estuary, near Budleigh Salterton in Devon. Robin breaks off one of the pods and hands it to me to taste. There is an immediate explosion of flavour, an intense mixture of celery and black pepper. This, he explains, is because Alexander belongs to the carrot family, the hidden spice rack of the hedgerow. Unlike commonly cultivated plant families such as mustard, mallow and mint, which are all edible yet mild, edible, Robin observes, doesn't necessarily mean tasty. The carrot clan, which includes parsnips, fennel and celery, is simultaneously poisonous and gourmet. Carrot is the real dodgy family, says Robin, but it has all the gold in it as far as I'm concerned. There are at least 700 wild edibles in Britain, but almost all go under the radar. The reasons for this are partly due to the fact that every culture has its own set of approved foods. When we became static farmers, said Robin, we didn't have GM labs, so the food plants we started growing came from wild variants. Over 10,000 years we've hybridised and found the plants that have the best flavours. But who's made that decision? The producer? The market? Or someone saying, we're going to feed you this? It's an odd question to ponder. Odder still is the fact that many of the plants we ignore have highly desirable properties, such as the Duke of Argyll's tea plant, whose tiny purple flowers are beautiful when viewed through a magnifying glass, 5-petalled stars with lime green centres streaked with purplish crimson. The tea plant is a boxthorn, Robin tells me, a member of the Solanaceae family, to which the fabled goji berry also belongs. Native to Asia, goji berries have long been highly prized in both traditional cookery and medicine, yet have only recently been discovered in the West, to where they are now shipped at vast expense as a superfood. Why bring the berries all that way when we've virtually got an identical plant on our doorstep, wonders Robin with a note of exasperation. Nobody knows whether these berries are as potent as the goji or not, but that's because nobody has bothered to find out. Moving a little further up the estuary, we come to the main crop of the day, sea vegetables. The low river banks are covered in a dense pale green plant that Robin identifies as sea purslane. We are walking, I realise, through a sea of salad. He bends down and picks a leaf for me to try. The taste is subtle, with that pleasing mix of salt and iron greenness that all sea vegetables seem to possess. Robin hands me another plant to sample. The first today I think I recognise, yet out here among all these unfamiliar tastes, I don't quite trust my instincts. It's samphire, isn't it? I ask Robin, receiving an affirmative nod. I bite into the stem and receive the familiar hit of sweet green juiciness and maritime minerality. It's delicious. I can see why it's become the go-to vegetable for fish chefs. On this golden day by the seaside, the taste is crazily intense, like a sea symphony dancing in my head. This sensation, Robin assures me, is perfectly normal when eating wild. Our senses can go into overload. I'm having a ludicrously good time, I realise, with one of those rare, glad-to-be-alive surges of euphoria. Robin is keen to get to his favourite patch, where sea vegetables grow in sufficient profusion to satisfy even a recent convert like me. We eat sea blight, whose off-putting name belies its delicate fronds and succulent umami flavours. Sea plantain, which, as its name suggests, takes sea sweetness to new levels. And last, but not least, sea aster, whose elegant leaves and subtle richness make it a prince among sea vegetables. Robin informs me that it's now on sale in Waitrose at £22 per kilo. What? I say. But where on earth are they getting enough of it to supply a supermarket? I have visions of a coastline denuded of my favourite new vegetable. There's a supplier who's cultivating it, says Robin, which I don't have a problem with, but I know plenty of foragers who do. The question brings up an obvious issue when it comes to foraging: scale. If we all started harvesting sea aster and picking wild mushrooms tomorrow, the land would soon be stripped bare, which is why most foragers follow a strict code that prescribes when and how much they harvest, and why cultivated wild edibles may not be such a bad idea. The problem, as Robin points out, is that cultivated wild plants are an oxymoron. My only issue, he says, is that when we take a plant from the wild, it's grown in its optimum conditions, so it's where it's meant to be. Farmers take plants and put them in places usually where they're not meant to be. So you get pests, you get lower production, smaller harvests, possibly, unless you spray it and use all the other funky stuff. Then you have to consider the plants themselves. A wild plant is generally twice as nutrition dense as a farmed plant, so when you take it from the wild and farm it, what are you losing? Foraging, it's becoming clear to me, is more than just a way of getting some free food. It's a state of mind. We humans are natural gatherers, Robin explains. Our ancestors foraged all year round, knowing that once they had harvested one crop, others would come into season. Following nature's fruitfulness created an abundance mindset in them, while farming, which often relies on one crop that might easily fail, engenders the fear of scarcity. In the past, I would have created 20 jars of hedgerow jam, but as I developed a deeper relationship with wild plants, I don't need to do that. Now I don't recommend that people make more than 3 jars of anything, because as soon as that plant's gone over, there's another 20 wild edibles you can go and work with, so there's no need to hoard. He reflects for a moment and adds with a grin. Wild garlic might be the exception. Foraging, Robin explains, is about feeding and being fed on multiple levels, psychologically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and definitely physically. You want to get out there as regularly as possible and engage with the plants so your connection deepens and your well-being is enhanced. It helps, says Robin, that wild herbs and spices don't last as long as shop-bought ones, so the plants pull us back into the hedge. Time is critical to foraging. You have short windows of opportunity, so nature teaches us to be opportunists. She gives us the gifts, and if we don't have the eyes to see it and we don't act in that moment, it's over. Eating wild, I reflect, is about far from shopping at Tesco as it's possible to get. While supermarkets are all about blurring time and place, the year-round availability of kumquats, foraging is all about the here and now, carpe astem. Convenience has nothing to do with it, but rather the patient gathering of food and knowledge. Supermarkets dumb us down, while foraging tunes us up, demanding that we be fully alert and engage. Plants teach me, says Robin. We've lost the natural granularity and terroir of place, of how this hawthorn community here can taste differently to one 20 yards away. Tastes are constantly changing too, since the ecosystem is always shifting. You can't dismiss a plant, Robin explains. You've got to try it through the seasons. The sun has climbed high in the sky by now, and the shingle is shimmering in the heat. My rumbling stomach reminds me that, delicious though they may be, a few sea vegetables don't quite amount to lunch. I muse on this as we walk back to the car park. Over the last few hours, Robin and I have been immersed in another world, far from the deadlines and pressures of modernity. As my mind wanders towards the interesting topic of what the local cafe may have on the menu, I feel like I'm fast-forwarding through time, from a distant existence when getting lunch was pretty much all one did. I'm grateful that I'll be able to soon satisfy my hunger with almost no effort on my part. Visions of a Devon cream tea float across my mind, but I'm also aware of what I'll be missing by eating so effortlessly. The truth is that progress, however desirable, rarely comes without loss. As we reach the car, I look back at the landscape I first glimpsed early this morning. The scene is as I remember it, yet somehow it feels different. I stare harder. The sea, beach, cliffs and trees all look the same. Yet in just a few hours, I realise, my view has been transformed. Blue Planet. By diminishing nature, we diminish ourselves. Wendell Berry. Our relationship with nature is of course far from as harmonious as the one I've just described. We have long exchanged full immersion in nature for some degree of technical mastery over it, a bargain that has reduced our bond with the wild, as well as its own natural richness. So extreme are the effects of our actions, indeed, that we've entered the Anthropocene, an age in which human activities are a decisive influence on planetary ecosystems. Quite when the era started is a matter of debate. Some suggest the first nuclear explosion, or Trinity test in 1945, while others favour the Industrial Revolution, when we first started pumping serious amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. Yet, the global impacts of our activities go back much farther than that. Our journey out of Africa, which started 70,000 years ago, has spelled disaster for many of the creatures we've met along the way. Before our arrival in Australia 45,000 years ago, for example, the continent was home to a spectacular menagerie of 24 large animal species, including giant koalas, marsupial lions and 2.5-ton wombats, all but one of which were wiped out within a few thousand years of cohabiting with humans. North American bison were not the first beasts to be massacred on that continent either. Of the 47 species living there when our ancestors arrived 14,000 years ago, 34 had vanished within 2,000 years. In total, of the 200 large mammals that roamed the earth at the start of our diaspora, one half would extinct by the time we started farming. As Yuval Noah Harari has remarked, our progress makes the human species look like an ecological serial killer. Today it is farming, rather than hunting, that is our most lethal activity. By selectively domesticating certain plants and animals at the expense of others, we've drastically reduced the range and variety of wild species on Earth, and are now destroying the habitats of those not included in our domestic circle. Ecologists warn that we are on the brink of a sixth mass extinction that could prove as deadly as the one that did for the dinosaurs. A 2017 study by a team including US biologist Paul R. Ehrlich found that 1/3 of vertebrate species were in decline. All of those studies since 1900 had lost 30% or more of their range, while 40% had experienced severe population declines of 80% or greater. As the authors observed, such figures are sure signs of future extinctions. Indeed, with the loss of some 200 vertebrates over the past century alone, the current rate of extinction over such a period is 100 times greater than the average for the past 2 million years. The author's conclusion was stark. We are, they said, in the midst of a biological annihilation that represents a massive anthropogenic erosion of biodiversity and of the ecosystem services essential to civilization. Biodiversity loss doesn't scare us as much as it should. We get upset about the plight of tigers or polar bears, yet few of us see their fate as directly linked to our own. We have, after all, got plenty of form in outliving majestic beasts. Yet the loss of species represents a threat to us potentially far greater than climate change. One need only reflect on Darwin's insight that everything in nature is connected. It's not just magnificent poster animals that we need to worry about, but invertebrates, of which by far the largest group is insects. I mean, most of us would probably sign up for a world without wasps or mosquitoes, yet their absence could spell catastrophe, as Rachel Carson argued in her 1962 book Silent Spring. The spring in Carson's title was silent, because the indiscriminate spraying of crops of DDT in the US after the Second World War wiped out the majority of farmland insects, and thus most of the birds that lived on them. Half a century after Carson's warning, Insectageddon is going global. In 2017, a 27-year study carried out on nature reserves in Germany found that numbers of flying insects had plummeted by 76%. Habitat loss, pesticide use, and climate change were cited as the most likely causes. The study confirmed what many in Europe had been casually observing for years, that windscreens were once spattered with bugs while driving on summer nights, and they were now spookily pristine. The implications of such a bugless world are sinister indeed. As well as being a vital part of the food chain, insects are key pollinators for many fruits and other food crops, as well as virtually all wild plants. They are essential to natural life cycles, breaking down animal and vegetable matter and recycling nutrients in the soil. Without them, the entomologist E.O. Wilson reckons, humans would last a matter of months. With their favourite food disappearing, it's no surprise that birds are following suit. In 2017, the French Museum of Natural History reported that farmland birds in France had declined by 33% since 1989, a finding mirrored by a UK DEFRA study reporting a 55% loss of birds since 1970. The global picture is similarly bleak. In 2018, BirdLife International reported that 40% of the world's bird species were in decline, with 13% under direct threat of extinction. Of the most endangered, 74% were directly impacted by agricultural intensification, identified as the main culprit in the worldwide decline of bird populations. Less visible, yet no less ominous, is the plight of sea life. In 2018, the FAO reckoned that industrial trawling has led to nearly 90% of the world's marine fish stocks being fully exploited, overexploited, or depleted, while warming oceans leading to the widespread loss of coral. The millions of familiar creatures with which we coexist, or unknown critters that may vanish before we ever check their existence, aren't just handy workers or essential links in the food chain. They are our greatest repository of intelligence about how to live on Earth, collated over almost 4 billion years. All our foods and medicines come from nature, and nobody knows what may yet be out there. Chemicals extracted from sea slugs, for example, are currently being tested as a potential cure for cancer. Biodiversity matters because it represents an interconnectivity that we don't fully understand. Like the Apollo 13 astronauts, who resorted to using bits of spare kit to mend their stricken spaceship, we need to cherish and our fellow cohabitants of Earth, not just because they represent the wonder of life, but also our best, indeed only chance of sharing its future. It's not all about us, of course. On the contrary, plenty of people have pointed out that the planet would do very well without us. The paradox is that, without us, there would be no better or worse. Only humans invest the world with such meanings. Furthermore, despite our destructiveness, most of us have an innate love of nature. This was demonstrated in 2017 when David Attenborough's BBC series Blue Planet 2, with its heartwarming footage of surfing dolphins and snoozing whales, was followed by shocking scenes of a sea turtle snagged in plastic. The series had an immediate and dramatic impact, triggering urgent debate and prompting the UK government to set new targets for plastic use, and major companies pledging to reduce theirs. Small is beautiful. As Blue Planet 2 demonstrated, our relationship with nature is powerfully governed by emotion. We care more about birds than insects because our feathered friends are beautiful, possess the gift of flight, and demonstrate behaviours such as migrating thousands of miles, selflessly feeding their young, and sometimes mating for life, that we find noble. Although a select group of humans are devoted to bugs, a far greater number of us are bird lovers, yet without insects there would be no birds and no us. As the tree huggers among us testify, however, nature doesn't have to be cute and cuddly to inspire our love. Indeed, it needn't even be alive in order to move us. Many of us, for example, feel drawn to mountains or renewed just by being by the sea. In this respect, searching for images of nature on Google is revealing. The first 20 that come up when I looked, 15 featured trees and 10 water. 6 were of mountains and 5 close-ups of plants. Of all 20 images, just 1 included a human, a silhouetted figure far off in the distance, and none features animals at all. Which is a bit strange when you come to think of it. When we imagine nature, we tend to conjure up majestic scenes such as an ancient forest, some snowy mountains, or a storm at sea. What we almost never picture is ourselves, or the microscopic beings that squiggle beneath our rose bushes or line the walls of our gut. Yet microbes, bacteria, viruses, protozoa, algae and fungi are what connect us, directly and literally, to the natural world. More essential to life than insects, they animate all the mountains, forests, fish, roses and humans on the planet. Without microbes there would be no life on Earth, which is why, if we really want to connect with nature, we need to start thinking small. For those unversed in the power of exponentials, it can be hard to grasp just quite how many microbes there are on Earth. There are an estimated 10 to the power of 30 of them. That's a figure, one with 30 noughts after it. 1 million times more than there are stars in the known universe. Too small to be seen by the naked eye, microbes nevertheless constitute 1/2 of all the living mass on Earth. If you find that hard to digest, try swallowing the fact that those in your gut weigh around 4 pounds. Microbes are absolutely everywhere, not just in laboratory petri dishes or the mouldy yogurt at the back of the fridge, but in rocks, soil, sea and air, on trees, flowers, birds and bees, on your dog's nose, and your lover's lips, on the book, tablet or phone you're holding right now, in your mouth, eyes, skin and guts. Our bodies contain some 100 trillion of them, the cells of which outnumber our own by just at least 3 to 1. With statistics like that, it's fair to wonder just how human we really are. If microbes were half or 1/1,000,000th as lethal as we tend to think they are, we'd all be dead by now. The fact that we thrive alongside them, and they with us, suggests a very different picture to the one painted by our germ-phobic, hygiene-obsessed culture. Although some microbes classed as pathogens can indeed kill with ruthless efficiency, the vast majority are not merely friendly, but essential to our existence. Microbes are ubiquitous, so what are they really doing? The answer is that they're doing just the same as you and me, trying to thrive in a complex and competitive world. They've been in it for far longer than us too. The first earthly life forms, microbes, are thought to have emerged around 3.85 billion years ago, when charged sea particles swallowed some mineral soup belched forth by a hydrothermal vent, a volcanic fissure in the ocean floor, to form single-celled bodies known as archaea. By eating the world's first meal, therefore, archaea, our common ancestors, kick-started life on Earth, using chemical energy to produce carbon, hydrogen, oxygen and nitrogen to form amino acids, the building blocks of life. For a billion years or so, archaea ruled on our acidic, sulphurous planet, but around 2.7 billion years ago, some deadly rivals came on the scene. Cyanobacteria, or blue-green algae, began proliferating in the oceans, using solar energy to absorb hydrogen from water, expelling oxygen as waste. This process, a primal form of photosynthesis, transformed our planet. A highly promiscuous element, oxygen combined with everything in sight, not least with iron to form the world's first rust belts. For the Archaea, this spelled catastrophe, since oxygen is a deadly poison to them. Our most distant ancestors either died or disappeared underground. Their exile has proved permanent. When the oceans became saturated with oxygen, the gas began leaking into the air to create the Great Oxygenation Event, the basis of our modern atmosphere. Once oxygen levels had stabilised at 21% at around 0.9 billion years ago, the stage was set for complete life to evolve, and for animals like us to walk the earth. Most of us probably know from dimly recalled biology lessons that plants use sunlight and water to perform photosynthesis, and this is a key byproduct of the process oxygen. But what few of us may realise is that the process depends on microbes. Chloroplasts, the subcellular organisms in plants that perform photosynthesis, consist of none other than our old friend cyanobacteria, still merrily chugging out oxygen into the atmosphere. Photosynthesis, from the Greek phos, light, plus synthesis, put together, remain the foundation of all life on Earth, providing us with the food we eat and the air that we breathe. In its modern form, it involves the conversion of sunlight into chemical energy, which is then used to combine elements from water and carbon dioxide to form carbohydrates, the basis of the food chain. Since this trick remains the sole preserve of cyanobacteria, algae and plants, it is to them that the rest of us earthlings, with the exceptions of the banished Archaea, owe our lives. When Isaiah said, "All flesh is grass," he wasn't far wrong. We all depend on beings capable, sometimes literally, of making hay while the sun shines. Apart from letting us breathe, cyanobacteria have one more trick up their tiny sleeves: the ability to fix atmospheric nitrogen. Nitrogen, as we saw earlier, is a key nutrient for both plants and animals. It exists mostly in air and must be fixed before it can be taken up by plants. Long before Mears, Haber and Bosch came along, cyanobacteria were performing this useful function. For example, keeping flooded Asian rice paddies fertile from one century to the next. We owe our lives to these cyanobacteria, so why haven't we heard more of them? One answer lies in the fact that they're so small that our awareness of them is only just now growing, as advanced microscopy allows us to peer into their world. Just as space telescopes like the Hubble have expanded our knowledge of the universe, electron microscopes are transforming our understanding of the microbial realm. While some scientists gaze up at the stars and dream of colonising Mars, others point down at the earth beneath our feet and wonder what treasures lie buried there. At both ends of the spectrum, our comprehension of nature is undergoing a revolution. So that was an extract from chapter 6 of Sitopia by Carolyn entitled Nature. And just to conclude again, I want to go back and recap just what Sitopia is, in Carolyn Steele's words. So, food's unique potential to heal us stems from the profound relationship that it represents between us and our world. The fact that we are blind to its power is due to having forgotten what it really is. By learning to see food and to see the world through it, we can find our true place in the natural order again. By valuing what we eat and knowing what it is, we can reconnect ourselves to each other and to our world. This is the true meaning of Sitopia. Using food to understand what it means to be human and how to coexist with our fellow humans and non-humans through time. By eating together consciously, we can be both grounded and transported, connected to a greater order of things. We can exist for a period both inside and outside time, and we can feel profoundly at home. So thanks everybody for tuning in tonight for the bedtime story, and I hope you have a lovely evening.